The large-scale factory beef industry sucks. It has a huge carbon footprint, the animals aren't treated very well, and the meat isn't very good. It just sucks. There's no other way to put it, and I don't like using my money to support it. But buying high-quality beef is expensive, often double or even triple the price of the stuff you find in big grocery store chains. I've always found local meat pretty tough to fit into a reasonable weekly food budget. That is, until I spent the last 6 months apprenticing at a local whole animal butcher shop. I've learned about some incredible butcher's cuts that are affordable alternatives to the popular cuts we all know. In this video, I'll be covering alternatives to ribeyes and New York strips, and I'm gonna do a couple more in a video that's coming out next week. So without further ado, let's get into it. This isn't a butchery video, but I do want to give you a quick little beef 101 so you have some context for when you're asking your butcher for these cuts. If you're not interested in this kind of stuff, use the timestamp below called Ribeye Alternative to skip straight to the steaks. Beef comes into a butcher shop split into 4 quarters. So butchers start with 2 hindquarters, or the back of the cow, and 2 forequarters, the front of the cow. Each of these quarters are then separated into smaller groupings of similar muscles. We call these primals. These primals are then again separated into even smaller groups called subprimals. Finally, these subprimals are then separated into individual cuts. So big picture view, the cow is separated into 4 quarters, then into primals, then into subprimals, and then finally into cuts that we know about. The 2 cuts I'm going to talk to you about today both come from the chuck primal, which primarily consists of the lower neck and the upper shoulder of the cow. Specifically, they're located in the subprimal called the chuck roll, which is easily the most underrated part of the entire animal. It has so many good tender cuts at a killer price point simply because the names aren't familiar to the average consumer. My shop likes to separate the chuck roll into 3 main pieces, but today we'll only be dealing with 2, the chuck underblade roast and the chuck eye roll, which leads me to the first cut I want to talk to you about. Delmonico steaks cut from the chuck eye roll make an incredible and affordable alternative to ribeyes. Anthony Bourdain famously served one of these steaks to Marco Pierre White when Marco ate at his New York City restaurant. They're super tender with a good amount of intramuscular fat deposits, which keeps the meat really moist as it cooks and adds a ton of flavor. These steaks are actually a grouping of 4 muscles, including one of the most coveted on the entire animal. It's actually the same muscle that's contained in a ribeye steak, so you know they're going to be pretty similar. These have quickly become my go-to cut, and honestly, if I ate one side by side with a ribeye, I might not be able to tell them apart. The main difference between the 2 cuts is that the Delmonico is more loosely held together because it's a grouping of so many muscles. The best part? You can get a chuck eye Delmonico for 30 or even 50% cheaper than a ribeye at your local butcher shop. Denver steaks are cut from one of the muscles on the underblade portion of the chuck roll and are another of my favorite hidden gems. They make a great, cheap alternative to a New York strip steak. Like a New York strip, a Denver steak is a pretty lean cut, although it does have a little bit more marbling than a New York strip. This leads to the big difference between the 2 cuts, a softer texture, which I actually prefer. Most shops sell the under chuck blade as a roast or just throw it in with the ground beef, so you can get an even better deal on Denver steaks than you would with a Delmonico. These will easily be 50% cheaper than a New York strip, if not even cheaper. It can be a bit intimidating to start incorporating different cuts like these into your weekly shopping, but it's actually a great way to begin to develop a relationship with your local butchers. Keep in mind, these are people who are passionate about local food and sustainable, high-quality meat. I can promise that they'll be stoked to talk you through some cuts and will work with you to get you what you want and what you need. And when they learn you're interested in these types of alternative cuts, they'll have all sorts of other recommendations for affordable butcher's cuts. And on top of that, you're helping them out to sell beef that would normally go to trim for a higher price. It's a win-win. Next week, I'm gonna dive into affordable alternatives to filet mignon and skirt steak. So if you enjoyed today's video and want to catch next week's, please consider subscribing or liking the video. It really helps me out and I would appreciate it. Until next time, later nerds.
Crash Course Kitchen. Crash Course.